All right. Good morning, morning. Happy Wednesday. I had to check the date. Let's see. See if we're up. Make sure we're live. Looks like we are online on everything. Just double check. If you are on already, good morning. My name is Garrett Leo. I will be doing a little cityscape painting today. I'm going to really channel my inner Bob Ross. Let's see. All right. Sweet. Good morning, Garrett. Thank you, Kyle. Good morning. Okay, so today I'll be doing a cityscape painting, and this is a lesson that I do with a lot of my middle school students because it's a very simple way to make a very professional looking cityscape. And I say professional meaning it'll look 3D without having to do 1-point perspective. It's actually a really good introduction lesson before you start talking about 1-point perspective because it's a little easier to digest the concept. Okay, so let's go over just materials I'll be using today. I'm going to recycle some of my Bristol paper from a past lesson. It's just a thicker paper, cardstock paper. It can absorb more water. You can do this on like printer paper. What I will say is you really have to be careful about the water you use. You might not be able to get so experimental. Yeah, I got you, Kyle. You might not be able to get so experimental with the water usage because the paper that you use, when you use watercolor, you need something that can absorb a lot and can hold its strength. So something like printer paper isn't designed for absorbing a lot of water. It's designed for absorbing the ink. And if you've ever printed like a full sheet of ink on something, you've realized that the paper gets like really wet and then you have to like set it to the side for a second. So you can try it with this. I'd recommend finding like a thicker cardstock paper. There is specific watercolor paper which has more fibers in it so that it can absorb the water. Like I said, I didn't actually have it in it, so I'm going to use Bristol paper, which should serve the same purpose. Okay, I'm just going to check. We have quite a few people on. Wait a couple seconds, and then we're going to get started. I'm eager to do some painting today. Yeah, I'll just keep going over the materials, and then by the time everyone's on, I'll start the lesson. Okay, so we've got our paper. I will be using just a standard Crayola watercolor set, paint set. So super simple, super easy to buy. These are probably like, I don't know, $2-3 at the at like anywhere. I think I got this at Target. So they have these pretty accessible anywhere, Walgreens, CVS. So if you're interested in tagging along, this is what I'll be using. You can have, some people have more fancy watercolor sets, right? You can use like more professional watercolor. I'm just going to use this because it's more accessible and a lot cheaper than the other stuff. I'll be using a pencil to do a little sketch first. I've got 2 different colored Sharpies. Usually when I have my students do this project, I just do black Sharpies. We don't use the colored Sharpies, but I'm going to experiment a little bit with the red today, see what effect we can get. And then this is the paintbrush that came with the paint set. You can use, I've got a whole selection of paintbrushes. What I would say for this is, depending on how long you want to paint for, choose your paintbrush size. Now again, there are very specific watercolor paintbrushes. This obviously came with the set, so it's designed for watercolor. It's just the type of bristles that are going to be on there. But if you're doing a huge painting, obviously you might not want to use something this small. I'm working on a 9x12 piece of paper. So I think I'm pretty comfortable with this size. It'll take me a minute, but it'll let me be patient and get some really nice colors on there. But again, if you want to scale up and you're doing a huge painting today, maybe use a little bit bigger of a brush. You can always switch it up. You don't have to stick with one the whole time. I might switch it up and use some smaller brushes to get some details in my buildings. That is your choice. So I'm going to set those over there. Then I've got a cup of water, right? Watercolor, you need water. The trick is to use more water, less paint, right? And I'm going to go over how to use the paint set in a second. And then I put in the posts about this lesson today. There was an option for salt or glitter. Now, little kids love glitter, so if you're gonna do this with your kids, or if you have any younger siblings and you want to do this with them, highly recommend bringing the glitter out. And then as they're painting, the areas that are wet from the water, you can just sprinkle a little glitter on there, and it'll kind of absorb into the paint, and then it'll stick to your paint. What you can do with salt, and while I'm talking about this, you can Google what salt paintings look like. It kind of like absorbs and crystallizes the paint around it. So if you sprinkle some on there, it'll like do some weird texture stuff with the paint. So I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of this on the background sky area to try to get some more texture, right? Because it's going to be pretty flat. It's a pretty simple painting. Not going to go in depth with shadows or highlights. Please take this as a jumping off point if you do any other, if you want to add anything else to your painting. But yeah, I think we can get started. So I'm going to tilt this down a little bit today. I don't have my second webcam yet. If those of you that have been following along, you know that I'm not a professional streamer yet. I think I'm on my way. But yeah, I'm still waiting for my other webcam to do like a overhead view to the workspace. But we'll make do with this. You can see that pretty well. And I'll even turn some of my lights so that you can see it a little bit better. And I'll turn the brightness up. There we go. Okay, so I'll work right here so you can see it. Right there. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a cityscape. Now, just very simple. A cityscape is a landscape. So it could be a picture, it could be a photograph, it could be a drawing of land, right? But if you specify that it's a cityscape, that means it's of a city. So we're going to do a skyline. Now, I'm going to put my skyline all the way to the bottom, right? So your horizon line, usually in a traditional painting, you have a horizon line where the sky meets the ground. This is a very simplified version, right? This is meant for doing it with children, but you can do it on your own. It's a really fun painting, but like I said, this is a very kid-friendly painting assignment. So I'm going to have my buildings, right? Because if it's a city, I need to have buildings. So I'm going to draw some skyscrapers today. You're going to have them go all the way to the ground, towards the bottom, right? So we're not worried about adding any details to the ground, any cars or lights or people or anything like that. If you'd like to add that and you want to take this project, this as a jumping off point, go for it. But like I said, this is a very kid-friendly assignment, so that if you do want to do this with your kids or your younger siblings, or your cousins or whoever, this is a very easy project to do with that. So I'm gonna draw my skyline, right? All my buildings, and they're gonna go straight to the ground off the paper. So all I'm really gonna add to this painting today is the buildings, details to the buildings, and then I'm gonna do a radial design background, and I'm gonna talk about that once I get there. Okay. So the technique that I'm going to show you today is the arrow method, right? So if you do, as you know, if you look at a skyline, there's perspective, right? You can see buildings that are closer, see buildings that are farther away. This arrow method will kind of give you it's like a trick to make buildings look like they're three-dimensional without actually having to have a vanishing point. So that a vanishing point is the actual term that we use in art for where all the things disappear to, right? It's the vanishing point. So using an arrow method, now you can use a ruler if you want your building super straight. I teach this lesson with, like I said, a lot of my middle school students. Some of them prefer having a little bit more structure with a ruler. Some people like freehanding it. I'm going to do a little bit of both. So the first step is just draw a line. The line, oh, these lights are so bright, I might have to turn them off when I show it. Right, the line right there, that is the height of the building. So however high you want to do it, that's what you do. And then you're going to draw the tops of an arrow. Just like that. Okay, so I drew an arrow. Then you're going to take where those arrow edges stop and take your ruler, or no ruler, it is up to you. And you're going to draw lines from the corners of your arrow all the way to the ground. So now you see if I had a vanishing point, if you follow the edge of this building, it would go and the vanishing point would be somewhere around there. But I'm not going to do that. This is kind of a simpler way to do perspective for buildings. So this looks almost like a 3D building. Now I could go on there and add my windows. Now, a tip for when you're drawing any windows or anything, if you're going left and right, the left and right part of the window, that needs to be parallel or running the same direction as the top of the building, right? The lines going down, up and down, those lines need to be running parallel with the line of the building going up and down, okay? So there I have a little building. I've got some windows on there. I'm not super worried about how clean the lines are because I will be erasing my pencil marks after I'm going to outline with Sharpie. Okay, so step 1 is just drawing the buildings in pencil. Step 2 will be outlining them in Sharpie, and then step 3 will be erasing the pencil marks. Now I'm going to do 5 buildings. I'm going to draw a big building right there. Now, depending on how wide you want the buildings, so if you look at this one, I've got one side of the arrow that's shorter, and then the other side is a little bit longer. That'll make the building look a little bit wider, right? So if I don't want a super rectangular building or a square building, and I want it to be a little elongated, right? That's how you do that. Just have one of the arrow sides be a little bit longer. Okay, so then comparing the two buildings, right? Maybe right now this one looks like it's far away. This one looks like it's closer just because it's bigger. If I want this to come more closer to the front, I'm going to draw a building behind this building. So same thing, I'll draw my arrow. I'm just going to draw really close to my tiny building. Draw really close. I'll draw my arrow on top. Connect those lines down. Now, just a tip, if you're doing this, I would try to get at least 5 buildings on your paper. And again, that depends on how big your paper is. I'm going to go with 5. Right? Okay, so now I got a little bit more dimension. I've got this building that's overlapped with this building, or this building is overlapped with this one, right? So that adds a little bit more dimension. You can kind of tell how far away things are. I'm going to try to aim for about 5 buildings, right? I don't want to overcrowd. Where's the best way to hold this? Right there. I don't want to overcrowd my buildings, right? So I don't want to have you can have a super congested city. I personally am not going to do that today. John, I'm glad to have you back again. Can you do this with acrylic or oils too? You can. You can change up the medium. Like I said, I'm doing a watercolor painting, but if you wanted, excuse me, to do this with acrylic paints or oil paints, you could. You just need to do different steps for your painting. So like acrylic, you can use water to kind of thin it out, and you can use, that's pretty much it. You can use water to thin it out, and you can apply it a little bit thicker. This is going to be really reliant on the water, adding a lot of water to it, and I'll cover that when we get there. And then oil painting, you'll need to use a turpenoid to thin the oil out, and then that's just a whole different process. So if you are interested in doing acrylic or oil painting, just make sure you do research. And like I said, YouTube is a wonderful resource. You can kind of just, search up basic oil painting, basic acrylic painting, and they'll go over those. If that's something you're really interested in, send us a message and we can kind of work around that. Because I do have, take a little field trip, I do have a whole bag of oil colors, right? This is a little bit more heavy duty painting style. The watercolor, especially the Crayola watercolor, is very kid friendly, right? Like I said, so this lesson, you can use these techniques to paint anything you want personally, but then if you'd like to do it with your kids or with any youngins that might not want to use oil, this is a great, easily accessible material. And the oil painting, you just need to make sure that you're painting that with a well-ventilated room, preferably like outside or somewhere, because it does off gas a little bit. It gets a little stinky. So just make sure you're not doing it really small office space. You know, open up the windows if you're going to do it. But yeah, you can use different. I mean, you could do this with, you could color this with color pencil. You can use this with oil pastel, whatever you'd like. It's all up to you. I'm just using watercolor. All right. Okay, so let's see. Excuse me. Right, so I've got my 3 buildings. I'm going to add a couple more. I'm going to add a little short one here. I feel like this is too tall. There's nothing there, so I'm going to add a little short one. There's freehand in it. Maybe this one will be like a little diner or something. Like I said, I'm not going to get too worried about adding any little details like trees or cars or anything. I'm just going to add the buildings, right? Very simple cityscape, buildings and sky. That's it. You're welcome, John. Something else just to quickly note, it's hard to see my pencil marks with the lights, but it's because I'm drawing really lightly. And that's something I forgot to say was whenever you're doing a sketch, especially for a painting, you always want to draw lighter, right? Draw light until you know it's right. So that right here, I drew that building here over my previously drawn line, and I could erase that line and you don't even see it, right? So always draw lighter. Don't carve the pencil into it, right? You want to be pretty relaxed, right? Take your time, be patient. Now I'm getting a lot of, I didn't wipe off my desk from the last time I did the ink drawings. Sorry, I'll admit to that. So I'm getting a little ink on my paper, but that's okay. I'll add, and if you don't want to do, windows, I'll just add a couple details now to my buildings. I'm adding my windows to the first building that I did. Again, those lines that you're making, if they're going left and right, they need to be parallel, meaning running the same direction as the top lines. Right, so I've got some windows on this building. If you don't want to do windows and do something else, you could do some patterns, right, to suggest windows. So on this big one, I'm just going to do some like stripes almost. I'll show you what this looks like in a second. You can't really see it right now. You will once I start using the Sharpie. Right? So for that building, I just suggested that there might be windows on there with those lines. But yeah, this back one, maybe I'll add a little, excuse me, my allergies are really bad recently. That's not fun. Add a little like antenna to the top of that building. Just a little detail, right? Don't get, have to get crazy with details, but I'm gonna add a couple. Let's see. Maybe I'll do like some bar windows on this one. So I'm not going to do the little square ones. I'll just do a giant bar of windows. And I will show you what that looks like in 1 second. But if you want to get a little bit more creative and take your painting to the next level, like I said, I've done this with my my middle school students. Sometimes I do like little advertisements. I had this group of boys. They all worked together at their table to come up with who owns the city. It was like Bob's City. So they had Bob's Furniture. They had Bob's Real Estate Company, Bob's Diner. And they just put these little tiny advertisements, little signs all throughout their city so that when you picked up all their paintings together, it looks like different paintings of the city, different areas of the city. Right, so I've got 4 buildings. I think I'll do, I'm going to add one here. We'll start there and see how it looks. A good tip with any art is just, take your time, obviously, but do it one step at a time, see how it looks, and then you can kind of tell what you need to add. Erasing my extra pencil marks. All right, so I've got that real tall, skinny building there. I think I'm going to do another one. Hey, Alicia. Morning. Hello. Thanks for watching today. I'm going to do another small building in the back. And to further encourage the depth of my painting. Right, so that's a new word. Depth with art is the look of something if you can like go back into the painting, right? So the painting looks like you can just jump in and just start walking throughout. That means it has depth. So I added another small building here. So now it's getting like, this is the closest building, right? This building is behind the closest building, and then this skyscraper is far in the background, right? I kind of like that. And I think I'm going to do a really tiny, I'll do 1, 2, 3. I don't like doing even numbers, but just erasing some of this pencil mark smudge. I've got it on my hand, so I'm already smudging it on my paper. For those of you that just joined us, we are going to be doing a cityscape watercolor painting today. So I am drawing a cityscape using the arrow method, and I'll show that in 1 second. So I'm drawing my buildings, filling it up, not worrying about a lot of details on the bottom, right? I'm having my buildings go all the way down, so this is very kid-friendly. Kids can get a little bit more detailed, just let that creativity flow. But for this, we're just drawing a couple buildings, and then I'm going to outline it with some Sharpies, and then I'm going to show you some watercolor techniques. And the watercolor that I'm using today is just a Crayola watercolor set. So real quick, for those of you who just came in, the arrow method, I'll draw a very simple 1-step, 2-step, 3-step, 2. Okay, so those of you that just came in, ignore the little toy soldier face. These are the steps for a arrow line method. So the first thing you do, if this line is the bottom of my paper, you draw an arrow, right? Depending on how tall you want your building, that's how high you go up. And then you draw the arrow sides. Step 2 is then at the corner of those arrow sides, right there, you draw a line straight down, right? Straight to the ground, and that gives you the sides of your building, right? And then it'll look something like this. And then I added some windows and I added some antennas. So it's 3 simple steps to draw a building. This gives the suggestion that it is 3-dimensional, right? It has some depth. You're not using 1-point perspective. That's the actual technical way to draw something with dimension or depth with like something like a city. This is just a way to suggest that the buildings are not flat, that they're 3D and there's areas behind it. So again, I'm drawing, excuse me, I've drawn 4, 5, 6 buildings so far. I think I'm going to add 1 more. And I'm just adding details as I go. And I think I said earlier, you don't have to go super crazy with the details. You can just suggest some windows, right? Just draw a couple lines on there. Or you could get pretty detailed and draw signs and stuff like that. Okay, I like this composition. I think I'm going to stick with this. Okay, I'm going to add just a couple details in my other buildings. Let's see what else I can do. Do a water tower. the water tower. I think I'll do big window there. You could add some doors at the bottom of your buildings too. I didn't add any for a couple of them, but I think I might for these. Okay, that looks pretty good. I don't like this, so I'm going to erase that. Right, again, draw lightly so that if you make any mistakes or want to change anything, you can. Let's see, what do I want to add? Like I said, if you don't want to add windows to your buildings, you could do some more creative stuff. So on this building back here, I just did some abstract designs. I did some circle-shaped windows, right? Not going super traditional. I'm going to add some more details to this, and then I think I'll be ready to go. Maybe I'll do like a brick texture. I think I'll do that. And just remember that however many details you add, that's just how long you're going to have to outline things. Alright, so that building I made a little brick texture. Right? Cool. Alright. Next step I'm going to do is I'm going to outline my buildings. We'll do the sky in a second. Now I'm using a Sharpie. You can't use something like a Crayola marker. It has to be a permanent marker for what we're going to do today. And the reason that is because when I start painting on top of it with watercolor, if I didn't do it in permanent, the water is just going to basically dissolve all that ink from like a Crayola washable marker, because water can wash it and it'll just kind of disappear, right? So we don't want that. I'm going to use a permanent marker, and I'm just outlining what I've already drawn, right? I'm tracing. Now I'm freehanding it. If you'd like to be super precise. Ooh, that was an unpleasant noise. Let's see if I have another Sharpie. Pardon this noise for a second. I've got this really old, like 1,000-pound desk. I love it, but it's just, you know, a giant thing of metal. Give me 1 second. I'm going to see if I have another Sharpie going around. I got some here. All right, switch it up a second. We're going to get a little experimental. I don't have another Sharpie, but I do have my Micron and it says it is waterproof. So we're going to see if it in fact is waterproof. I'm going to outline the rest of my buildings using this. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with what a micron is, it's just a really fancy ink pen. I use this. I actually use this in my demo that I did with Zachary for the dueling doodles. It's just a really high quality ink pen, and you can get them all different sizes. You can buy a kit of them. This one is the graphic thickness, so it's just like a big marker. I'm going to use this to outline. That's because my Sharpie was just drying out. This is one that I found in my studio. So like I said, just find something that's permanent and that's waterproof. Can't really do it with Crayola, unless it's a permanent Crayola, because that water that we're going to add is just going to wash it away. You see that? I'll put it right here. And like I said, I'm freehanding it. It's okay if I've got a little crooked building. Doesn't bother me. But if you'd like to use your ruler to, I don't know what that hand gesture was. If you want to use your ruler to make sure your lines are super straight, do that. But then I'd be here for like another 5 hours just tracing this with my ruler. And I don't think that's very entertaining. So I'm sparing you all. We got some people in here. Thank you for being here. Just real quick, if you are joining us now, I'm doing a cityscape, which is a landscape, right? Land means that it's a picture, photograph, drawing, painting of land. A cityscape is a landscape with a city, right? So I use the arrow method to draw all of my buildings, and I'll show you what the arrow method is if you're just now joining us. It is a 3-step process to drawing buildings that look three-dimensional, right? We're not using a one-point perspective to professionally do it, right? But we're going to suggest that they're three-dimensional. So step 1 is drawing an arrow, just like that. Step 2 is connecting the arrow corners all the way down to the ground. This line is the bottom of my paper. And then step 3 is adding your details, right? Your windows, your antennas, whatever you want to add to the buildings. Now I filled up my paper. I'm using a 9x12 piece of Bristol paper, right? So when you do a watercolor, you can do it on something like printer paper, but you just can't use a lot of water really fast, so it's going to take you a long time. And also your paper will start to curl and things, so you really want to use a thicker, heavy-duty paper, right? This is almost like a cardstock, but it'll allow the water to absorb in the paper, excuse me, and not bend or crinkle up the paper. So I'm using a Bristol pad. Now I sketched out all my buildings with pencil, and then now I am outlining with a graphic permanent pen. I was using a Sharpie. My Sharpie's dried out, so I'm using the permanent pen now. Hello from Canton Avenue. Hello, Karen Lynn. So yeah, I'm gonna make sure you can see my workspace. Now I got some graphite from the pencil on my hand, and I've kind of smeared that all over my paper. Not super concerned about it right now, because after I'm done outlining, I'm going to take an eraser and I'm going to erase pretty much the entire paper. I'm going to get rid of all the pencil marks, so that when we paint, it's only the paint on the paper. Super crisp. Just another technique for you. If you're working with just like a lot of ink, black lines, if you want to make something look, excuse me, like it's far away, right? Use thinner lines. If you want to make something look like it's closer to you, wherever you're looking at the picture, use thicker lines, right? So if it's farther away, draw thinner. If it's closer, draw thicker. I'm actually going to add I'm going to add some brick texture to my brick building, and I'll show you what stippling is. That's how I'm going to add the texture. So stippling is when you poke a lot of dots. I want that brick to look like it's a little rough. It's not super smooth, right? A glass building wouldn't have these dots on there because it's not a rough material. So that's something that I would encourage all of you if you're doing this project. It's a very simplified version of drawing a cityscape, but you could take it up a notch by, can you see those little dots? Take it up a notch by adding some texture. So maybe in these suggested window buildings, I'll do some suggestions of glass, and I'll show you how I'm doing that. I'm just making those little marks on there, and that kind of suggests a reflection of, you know, the light, the sunlight's hitting it or the moonlight's hitting it, it's reflecting. That's something that you'll need to decide, and I'll need to decide in a second, is this cityscape going to be at night, or is it going to be during the day? And I'm going to talk about color schemes, another vocab word for us, in a moment. I'm just outlining all my windows. And again, if I wanted to, I could add some little reflection lines on those windows. Just like that, right here. Or not there, right here. Add some reflection lines. If you're a teacher watching, you want to do this project, you can direct message me on my Instagram, manglazedblack, because I do have a lesson plan for this project. Like I said, I do this for my middle school students. It's just a really simple project that you'll be able to make something that looks really nice. They can be proud of it. And it takes about, like, I'm going to do this in one sitting, right? Someone told me that, you know, when you're planning for kids to do something, plan for like ×3 the amount it takes you to do it. So this usually takes 1 day to draw all the buildings and add the details. Maybe pretty much like 1.5. The next class, if it's an hour-long class, you could spend doing the outlining and then finishing any details they didn't finish. And then the third day, or the third hour, right, depending on how often you see them, is painting. Painting goes pretty fast. And like I said, you can kind of control how long it takes your students to finish painting, your kids to finish painting, because if you give them a brush that is this small, it's going to take them a couple days or a couple hours. But if you give them a brush this big, they'd probably finish it in 5 minutes, right? So it's all, you can pretty much control how fast a project is finished by the tools that you use. So you in your own practice at home right now, if you want to spend an entire day painting, do it a little tiny paintbrush at a time. You can do that. And again, I'm just tracing my pencil marks. For those of you that may or may not have just joined us, I am working on a cityscape painting. So step 1 today was, oh, my marker's drying out a little bit. Step 1 was drawing my cityscape using the arrow method. I'll show that off in a second. And then once I have my buildings drawn, I can add the details. And then right now I am outlining them in a permanent ink. All right, so I started using my Sharpie, but my Sharpie was a little dry, so I'm using a Micron graphic pen, but it's still a permanent ink. All right, there's how my cityscape looks so far. This is the step-by-step for a arrow line method. You draw an arrow. This line on the bottom right here is the bottom of the paper. Step 2 is you draw from the corners of your arrow. They go straight to the ground, right, to make your building sides. And then step 3, you add your details, so your windows and antennas. Had a question from John. Did I go through a cohort or did a SAW cohort, or did you guys work with them? You're asking if I went through like a CreatiVets cohort? Question for John. I am not a veteran. I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. So a little bit about me. If you didn't tune into those first couple streams when I was talking a lot about myself, like I said, I'm not a veteran. I met Richard Casper, the co-founder and executive director of CreatiVets, when I was studying at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. That's where they started their art program. I was actually a TA for the program for about three times. I was a TA for it, and then I just kept working with Richard and with CreatiVets and really just fell in love with the mission. And the mission, for those of you that aren't familiar, is to empower veterans to heal through the arts and music. So I was a TA. I kind of instructed all the hands-on ceramics portion of the program, because at SAC it's a 3-week intensive program where we fly veterans from across the country to Chicago. They study at the School of the Art Institute, and we focus in ceramic sculpture, but really show them anything they can do. So 3D printing, painting, sculpture, woodworking, metalworking. They really do it all. And like I said, I worked as a TA through the school for CreatiVets for a couple classes, and then Richard asked me to be their art director. So then I showed off some skills in curating. So I actually got to work as a curator for a while and put together our shows at the National Veterans Art Museum and a couple other places. And then over time, just like I said, just continue to work. And a lot of our, if you missed the why we're doing these programs right now, all of our programs that we were currently running, we had to pause due to social distancing and the coronavirus. So I was actually a co-instructor with Zachary. He's our Chicago team leader. I was co-instructing a local program for veterans in Chicago in partnership with Art Reach Chicago. And then I visited like the Dallas Museum of Art program we were running. But again, had to pause all that. So we wanted to bring some classes to veterans at home. So here's my clean cityscape, right? I sketched it. I outlined it in a permanent marker or a permanent pen. And then I just took my giant eraser and just erased all the pencil marks, right? Because I don't need those anymore. The next thing I'm going to do, and this is something you don't have to do it, but I think it makes your thank you, John. It makes your composition look a little bit more patterny, makes it look a little bit more nice, in my opinion. So I have my buildings, they're highly detailed. I'm going to make a background design for, and it'll be a radial design. So a radial design, for those of you that do not know, is a design based on a circle, right? So that could be the sun or the moon, and then it could be the rays coming out of it. Excuse me. Let's try it. So I'm going to start at the top right corner. I think I'm going to do, let's talk about colors for a second before I keep going. I'm going to pick 2 color schemes. A color scheme is a very specific selection of colors that you could use for painting, a drawing, a sculpture, whatever. I'm going to have a color scheme for my buildings, and then I'm going to have a contrasting or complementary color scheme for the sky. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick cool colors. So that's blues, greens, and purples for the buildings. And I'll only use those colors. And then for the sky, I'll do a complementary set of colors, right? The opposite would be yellows, greens, and oranges, okay? Ben says I need a mask. I don't need a mask. I've been social distancing. I've been in my apartment. I've been stocked up. I've been making some art at home. Thank you, Ben. So color scheme 1 is cool colors. That's your blues and greens for the buildings. And then color scheme 2, I think I'm going to do it during the day, right? My buildings are cool and cold because they're made out of metal and glass and steel. And then the sky will be warm. Maybe it's like in the afternoon, or it's like at dusk, right? It's getting like some orangey colors. So I'll do my sun in the top right corner. It's a pretty standard spot. You could do a couple examples real quick. So here's 3 different examples of a radial design. I'm going to use this one, right? So starting in the top right corner, and then it'll kind of radiate out. It's up to you how close these lines are to each other. They could be really spread apart, so you have big areas to paint, or they could be really small. Bubble letters like graffiti. Yeah, Ben. Could put some graffiti on these buildings. That'd be pretty cool. Here's another radial design, but the circle would start at the bottom, and then it'd be radiating almost like a rainbow. And then here would be just one that's like off the picture, but it's still based on a circle, right? They're curves. When I draw them, I'm going to draw them behind the buildings. So they're not going to be, these lines aren't going to be going over the buildings. This is in the background, right? The foreground, meaning it's up front, it's closest to you, are all my buildings. And then in the background is your radial design, okay? Brett just sent me a sticker. Thank you. I'm going to add, I'll do a random bubble letter. I'll do a random bubble letter, Ben. What do you want me to write in the sky? While I'm doing my radial design, tell me what I should write in the sky. Now this, you can choose how often the lines are. They could be pretty far apart. They could be closer together. Up to you. I'm going to have them get wider and wider as they go away. So it looks like that. Right, there's my radial design. Ben, you're running out of time. I'm going to outline this, and then you won't be able to tell me what I'm writing in the sky with bubble letters. So. Nothing yet. Might want to pick. Ben, hopefully you're still watching and tell me what I'm writing. And again, if I wanted to use the pen to make it look, to have more depth, I would make these buildings have a little thicker of a line so they look closer, and then these really thin lines in the background would be my design for the background, right? So thin lines far away, thicker lines meaning it's up front, it's closer. Now if you want, you could, if you're not comfortable freehanding it like I am, you could get something that's a big circle, like a bowl, put it up top and trace it, and just trace it over your buildings really lightly with pencil, and then you can erase it all again. But I am pretty comfortable just winging it. You messed up, Ben, because now I'm done. Boom, my radial design, right? So those of you that may or may not have just jumped in, I'm working on a watercolor painting cityscape. My buildings were all drawn with the arrow method. There is the arrow method right there, right? And then I added all my details. I outlined it all with a permanent pen. I used my Sharpie, but my Sharpie dried out, so I'm using a Micron graphic pen, another permanent ink. And then I made a radial design for the background, the sky area. I'm not worried about having things on the ground, right? It's just the skyline, it's just the buildings and the sky. And then the sky is a radial design, meaning that it is based on a circle. Okay, now I'm just going to go over with my eraser and erase my pencil marks from the radial design, any smudges that I may or may not have made with my hand, just erasing those as well. Okay. Don't wear t-shirts for bands you don't listen to. Listen here, listen here, Benjamin. I listen to Metallica, all right? I know who Metallica is. You never heard of Metallica? That's the band I got on my shirt. I think I'm just sweeping the voice. I'll vacuum that later. Got it all in my sweatpants now. All right. So wipe your paper off. If I didn't mention, you could do this on a canvas too. If you had a canvas ready, here's an example of a canvas. It's a mine's a little dirty because I've carried around a bit, but that's like a pre-stretched canvas painting. You could do it on that as well. I'm doing it on a Bristol paper, so it's like a cardstockish paper. It can absorb that water. Okay, so I've sketched my buildings, I've sketched my background, outlined everything, and I've erased my pencil marks. Now we're going to paint. So let's talk about painting. I'm using a watercolor set. A watercolor set from Crayola, just a real simple one. You can get these pretty much anywhere, and they're not too expensive. And I'm going to use a cup of water. I also put in there to get some paper towels. This is just for, you know, switching colors. You're going to have to dry your brush off for a second. So, okay, watercolor set. Watercolor paint, you need water, right? So I'm going to add some water to my brush. And I think I'll start by painting, we'll do the background first. That's like a, I'll do the background first. That's like a good technique to do when you're painting. You start in the background and then you work towards the front. So my background is going to be my warm color scheme, right? Reds, oranges, yellows. So I think I'll start with a yellow. I'm taking that water and tapping it on the paint. I am not taking my paintbrush and squishing it in paint. I'm actually going to wipe it because I had a little bit of a green color in there. So tapping it on there. What I'm looking for is that I'm making a puddle. Let me see if you can see that. So I've got a little puddle of water there. I've got a little paint on my brush. I think I'll do yellow for the center point. And then I'll do yellow, orange, red. That sounds good. I'll do yellow, orange, red. So yellow, next stripe is orange, next stripe is red. This one would be yellow. And I'm holding it. I'm not holding it on the little metal part. I'm holding a little further back, right? You want to be smooth with it. I'm adding that paint down there. If I run out of paint, right, I just get a little more water, tap it in my puddle, I paint it on. Now, we spent a long time drawing our lines, so this is a good moment to practice staying inside the lines, right? I'll keep going with the yellow. Tap it in the puddle. So it's yellow, orange, red. The next one is yellow. Taking my time on that edge. If your paint, I'll show you an example, is too dark, right? That little spot right there is too dark. Get a little water. Clean your brush off so it's just water on there. And you can use that water to kind of thin out that paint and spread it around. Be careful when you're painting around little areas like your antennas. Like that. A little bit more paint. Ben had a question. You said Bristol. I think you're questioning my paper. You're questioning the type of paper that I'm using, Ben. I am using a Bristol pad paper. I have one here. So the type of paper I'm using, Ben, is a Bristol pad by Strathmore, not a sponsor. This I use for my ink drawings and my comic book drawings. So I use a lot of ink. It just allows the ink to soak into the paper and not spread. So that was the closest thing I had to watercolor paper. The watercolor paper would have a little bit more tooth so that the paint kind of spread a little bit more. This is going to control this. And again, it's just because you don't really want to use something like something very thin. If it's a thin paper, it most likely will not be able to hold the water that you're going to use. Because like I just showed in that example, if you have really thick paint and you need to make it thinner, you just add water, right? So if it's super thin, it won't be able to do that. Got my puddle of yellow. Now here's the tricky part. You just want to make sure that like if I paint this one, right, it won't match up with the line going across. So just line it up. Make sure you're going on the right one. Take your time. I'm in these really small areas. I could switch to a smaller brush. I think I'm just going to stick with the big one. Yellow, orange, red, yellow. Right. Taking my time. I'm not painting with this small part right here. It's not my dad's shirt. You know what? Now I got Barton here. So I don't know. Richard must have texted you two to get on at the same time. Now I have Ben and Bart on this stream. I can't wait to hear these comments. This is my shirt, Bart. My dad gave it to me, but it's my shirt. Yeah, so I'm gonna add another line right here because I want some yellow down there. Boom. All right, so I got all my yellow done. All right, looks pretty good. The trick with watercolor is keep the colors light, right? Use more water, less paint, because you can always add more layers. If I'm using really heavy, thick paint on this painting, and I want to go back and change something, you really can't, right? It's easier to go darker. It's harder to go lighter, right? So keep it light. Use a lot of water. Don't make your paint super heavy and sticky. Otherwise, you're just kind of, you know, the painting will be done and you can't do anything. It won't be ruined. It'll be done. You won't have a lot of options. Okay, so now I'm going to paint my orange. So again, cleaning off my brush, right, tapping on the edge, get some water, add my orange. A little paint, just like this. My second color I wanted to do was orange, so I'm going to start painting that. For those of you just joining in, I'm doing a watercolor cityscape. So I recently sketched out my buildings with the arrow method to make buildings look three-dimensional. Can't show you that now because that's on the back of my paper. That reminds me, if you're painting with watercolor, try to keep your painting on the table or wherever you're painting, because if I tilt this right now, the watercolor will start running. It'd be a cool effect if you want to do it on purpose. I do not want to do that. See, now this big area, I could switch to a bigger brush. I'm not going to though. It's going to take my time. Now, I did mention that there was an optional use of glitter or salt, just like regular table salt. I'm going to show you what that can do in a second. I don't have any glitter, but I do have salt from the salt dough demo. So if anyone's interested in learning how to make a salt dough so you can do some sculpting at home if you don't have clay, go find that video. It's on our YouTube or Facebook page. Okay, got some orange there. Orange here, orange here. I'll add a little salt. So what salt will do is it'll kind of add a little texture to the paint, kind of crystallize. So add it wherever there is wet paint. So I'm just going to take a clean brush, rehydrate that paint a little bit, and add some salt. So hopefully by the end of like me painting, you'll be able to see what that looks like. I'm not going to use the salt for my buildings. I'm just doing it for the background. I think it'll look cool. And now I'm going to do my red. So again, I've cleaned off my brush. Now, you can't see my water. My water is pretty clear, but if your water starts getting like really dark and polluted from the colors you're using, just get new one. Rinse out your water and get some new paint. Add a little salt on there. A little cool texture. Now the red will look a little pink if you're adding a lot of water. It's all good. Adding my salt. What that's going to do is the salt's going to kind of absorb the water, so it'll give like a little cool texture. Depending on how much you use. Some of these I'm putting a lot of salt, some of them put just a little. That was a lot. Now it's hard to, I don't know if you can tell from, or you can. See how my paper is kind of bowing now, right? It's kind of like warping. That's because this is not meant for watercolor. It's meant for ink, not a lot of water on the paper, but it'll be fine. You'll experience a lot of warping if you use something like printer paper, because printer paper is not designed for any sort of water on the paper. Okay, so my background's done. Set my extra salt there. All right, Ben. Ben wants me to do the salt like Salt Bae. I'll do that on the next part. So I'm going to ignore my rule about no picking things up, and I'm going to show you. There's my background, right? Nice light colors. I've used warm colors for the background. Now I'm going to paint my buildings using the cool colors, my blues, my purples, my greens. Okay, so I'm going to start. I want this building blue. I've known that from the start. Adding my water. Now, just a quick note, colors like blue and purple, they get dark really fast, right? So that's already pretty dark. So I'm gonna clean my brush. I want this to be a nice light blue like this. Boom, just like that. Add a little dark blue, wash the brush off, and then with just water, I can paint it and spread out that color. Now you may have areas like you can see there's a little orange getting in my color, because if there's two colors of wet paint next to each other, they'll kind of spread into each other. You can get experimental and like purposely do that. I'm not going to. Keep it pretty clean with my color scheme. So there's my blue building. I think I want this one to be purple. Oh, do I have any crayons here? Do I have any crayons? I don't think I do. A trick that you could do is a crayon resist. So what crayons are made out of wax, and if you draw on a paper that you're going to watercolor over, when you paint it, it won't stick to the waxed crayon. So if I had a white crayon here, which is what I was going to do, but I don't think I had any crayons in my studio, I could draw over all of these windows, like color them in with a white crayon, so that when I paint it, none of the paint sticks to the windows, right? So that would be a very cool and interesting way to make sure that you don't paint on top of the windows. But I don't have any of that here. So I'm just going to go with what I got. Patience. Can we still see that? Yeah, we can. And now it's just, take your time. I already went over a couple windows. It's all good. All right, that looks pretty good. You can also play around with, like I said, you don't have to do shadows now, but my sun is in the top right corner, so that would make all the left sides of my buildings darker than my right side, right? If the sun was shining on this side, it'd be lighter there. So I'll try to do that here. So the left side of my building is purple. The right side will still be purple, it'll just be brighter and lighter. I'm just adding a little paint at a time. Too much paint gets too dark too fast. Right, so there's a little experiment with shadow. Right, so if my sun is up here, going down this way, this is the lighter side, that is the darker side. That's how you could make some shadows in your buildings. Now you can already see, well, I'll show you that salt in my orange, it's starting to like spread out, crystallize, and make a bunch of cool texture. That's why we add the salt. If you want. You don't have to. Let's see. Oh yeah, I bet Richard and Zachary have a lot of crayons for me. That's, I mean, when you had to stock up on food, you know, you gotta do what you gotta do. If Richard's watching, I bet he's really mad right now. He's like, I feel exposed. I'm gonna go with this building. This like really simplified one was blue. I'm gonna do the same with my one on the edge here. So I'm just taking that water, spreading out that paint. If you have any spots that kind of run away from you, just take a paper towel and dab it down. Right. So I've got my 2 blue buildings. I'll do, oh, you see how I've got, this blue is leaking because I picked it up. I'm just going to take my paper towel, dab it on the surface. I kind of picked up all my orange, so I'm going to add a little orange back to that background area. Now this little brick building, I'm going to do green. We'll do some green bricks. Now again, you don't have to do the color scheme. That was an option. I did it because it's good to practice, you know, your color theory. So my Richard is asleep right now. I don't know. Richard's always up really early in the morning. Background is my warm color. Those of you that are just joining us, I did an arrow line. I call it arrow line. It's because I'm using an arrow method to draw the buildings of a cityscape. Right, it's a picture of a cityscape of a city. I sketched it out in pencil. I outlined it in a permanent ink, so I used a Micron graphic. I started with a Sharpie, but it was too dry. Outlined everything, erased everything. I'm painting the background with a warm color scheme. So warm colors are oranges, reds, yellows, and I'm painting the buildings with the opposite, a complementary set. So that's a cool color scheme. The cools are my greens, my blues, my purples. Now, if you're a little advanced, yellow can be a warm or a cool color. If there's a little blue in the yellow, it turns to a light yellowy green. That could be a cool color. And then purple, right? If you add a little bit more blue, it's more violet, right? That could be a cool color. And then if you want it to be warmer, if it's a little red in it, it's a little bit more purpley, right? That could be warm. So purple and yellow you can use for either or, depending on if you start mixing your colors. All right, this weird building, I'm going to do green as well, because I don't want a purple building next to a purple building, and I don't want a blue one next to a blue one, so I'm going to do green. Fun fact about Garrett Leo is my favorite color combination is purple and green. You guessed it. So I'm going to keep trying to do that shadow. So I'm just adding a little bit of green on the right side, a lot of green on the left, to kind of suggest that there is some shadows going on in this building. Now the windows, I'm going to actually add a little blue. Just like that, added a little blue on there. I'll pick it up in a second. I don't want to do it now because I got a lot of water in there. Where's the best spot to see this? Right there. All right. I've got a couple buildings left. I think I'll do green for the short, squat little one. Now, important note with your brushes. I didn't say this, but you want to be gliding the paint on the surface. You don't want to be squishing it down and rubbing it side to side like that, because it, one, destroys your brush, and two, if your painting looks really dry as you're painting, right, so you can see like scratchiness from the paint, from the bristles, you want to add more water, right? And if you've got areas that are dry and scratchy because you didn't have enough water on your paintbrush, just take water, just clean water, no paint on it, and just like go back and forth, right? Not pressing down, just using the bristles. You can kind of paint the, fix that paint. Richard, I did talk about what kind of paper I'm using. Just if anyone just jumped in and they're curious and they didn't hear that part, I'm using a Bristol paper by Strathmore. This is meant for more ink drawings. That's what I use it for. I didn't have a specific watercolor paper at home. If I were going to do watercolor paintings for a while, I would get a set of specific watercolor paper. I believe Strathmore makes watercolor paper. This is a good brand. I really like the quality of their paper. A pad like that, you can get them really large. You could do, this is a 9 by 12. You get it for maybe like $10 for like a sheet of like 20 really high quality papers. You don't want to use really thin paper. You want to use paper that has a little sturdiness. So like this Bristol pad wasn't meant for watercolor because you can see it's starting to like bow and like bend a little bit, but it's holding its strength because it is designed for absorbing ink. So if you look on here, those of you that just joined in, my salt that I put on the sky, it's starting to crystallize. You can see that texture that's forming. That's optional. You don't have to do that. Again, it's something fun that if you're doing this with your kids or or your students or whatever, adding salt, they could add the salt. That's really fun for them. And if you have glitter, I would always recommend controlling the glitter because glitter gets everywhere. So maybe just walk around and then you have to add it to wet areas. So if it's already dry and you add the salt or add the glitter, it's not going to do anything but make a mess. So as they're adding their water and painting, it has to be a freshly painted area. Add the salt or add the glitter and it'll stick into the paint. And I'm just going to go right back to, thank you for that question, Richard. Right back into that little green building I was painting. And then if you don't, I also mentioned the paintbrush that I'm using. There are specifically watercolor paintbrushes. This one came with the little paint set I'm using. I'm just using a Crayola watercolor paint set, really cheap, maybe like $3. It came with a brush, but depending on how large you're painting, I have a couple different types of paintbrushes, right? If you're doing something very large, obviously recommend getting a larger brush, right? If I'm doing a tiny painting, maybe doing something with a really tiny brush head, right? So it all depends on how long you want to be painting for, how patient you want to be, and how detailed you want to get. This is a pretty blank canvas for adding other things to make it however you want it, right? So you could always add little tiny trees or buildings or people or cars, right, to like a street. I did not draw the street because for this project it's very kid friendly. You're focused on drawing buildings and then the sky, right? So it's two very simple things they can digest right up front. For the buildings, it's the arrow method, right? Draw an arrow right here. The ends of your arrows, draw lines down for your building edges, and then add your details. And then for the background, I did a radial design. So a radial design just means that it's based on a circle. So I've got my sun in the top right corner of my moon, and then I do a radial design out. So it's circle, 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 getting bigger. But you can start them anywhere. Now you can see how I've implemented that in mine. And then for colors, if you weren't here for that, I'm doing 2 color schemes. Color schemes are very specific colors that you use in a painting or a sculpture or a drawing. My background is a warm color scheme, so if you're looking at it, take a guess. What do you think it is? Reds, oranges, yellows. And then for your buildings, take a guess. It's blues, purples, and greens. Now the reason I do, I switch it, like one sky is one specific set and then the buildings are another. When I teach this lesson to middle schoolers, it's learning about depth, right? The buildings look like they have dimension, right? If they're overlapping, it's creating depth. You're talking about color schemes, so what are color schemes? And then using those color schemes, what are you creating? By having warm in the back, cool in the front, you're creating contrast. Contrast is 2 opposites right next to each other, right? So this is a great lesson for any educators using this for kids or students. This is just a really very simple, like I said, the students can digest it, and then they can make something that looks really, really cool and pretty advanced. You know, I've done this with 3rd grade and they do something like this, and it makes them feel really confident in their artistic skills that they were able to draw these buildings and it looks real, like they could just walk right into it. I'm going to finish my last building. I think I'll do different shades of purple in all these little tiny areas. So I'll do like dark purple, light purple. Can you see me painting? Yeah. It's hard to see like I said, very early in my streaming career right now. I will be getting another webcam to do like an aerial shot of the painting, so you can kind of see very close what I'm doing. But this will serve for now. You know? And something that you could do, and I didn't mention it, you could leave areas, you know, white. I didn't. I only left the windows here white. Ben just asked, how do you seal it? You don't really need to seal this, Ben. I've never sealed a watercolor. You could spray or like paint a little Mod Podge on it. But I don't seal my watercolors. Maybe if there's any professional watercolor people out there, maybe it is your turn to chime in. What do you use to seal your watercolors with? But traditionally with my own practice, and then if I'm working with my students, I don't seal them. I just leave them dry. Because if you seal it, then it gets really glossy, and you don't see the paint, right? So as this dries, my watercolor will get glossier and glossier. That's starting to spread. Let me fix that before I keep talking. And again, if this is your first stream you're jumping on for CreatiVets, CreatiVets' mission is to empower veterans with healing through arts and music. So the reason we're doing this is because a lot of our programs have stopped due to coronavirus and needing to social distance. So we wanted to start offering content and classes and things that you can join in with from your home. So if you haven't seen any other streams, I've been working on some streams of things that you can find at home to work on. So we did a salt dough recipe. You could do some sculpting, and you could bake it in an oven and keep it and then paint it. Or I did a ceramic sculpture demo if you do have access to ceramic clay or an oil clay. We'll be doing some guitar lessons, some songwriting lessons, right? Things that you can do during this time of, keeping away from society. Because that's what we have to do right now. If you are interested, let me just check real quick the schedule. Later today at 5 o'clock, we will be having another stream with Zachary, and that will be a color stream. He's going to be talking about painting and what to do with color mixing. I'm not going to talk about what he's going to do exactly because I'm not really sure. We're going to find out. But yeah, please share this with any friends or veterans or family members that you think would be interested in seeing some just live content. And then if you miss any of the previous live streams, you can see it on our YouTube or Facebook page because they kind of stay up there and you can go watch them again. But at 5 o'clock today, Central Time, Zachary will be doing another stream, and then we'll have some more for this upcoming week. If you're interested in kind of planning out your week for things to do, move my camera up, or things to tune in for, you go to creativets.org/live. You can see our updating schedule on things that will be streaming. Some of the things will be to be determined, right? We're trying to get a lot of people on here so we can do a variety of things and a variety of demonstrations and classes. But you can go on there to get the latest updates. If you haven't liked our Facebook page or followed us on Instagram, please do that because we do post updates to classes when they're going to start, and you can tune in on our social media as well. I think this is it for my painting. I'm just going to take off a little extra paint there. But yeah, that's it. So we started with a blank sheet today. Sketched it all out with our buildings, our arrow method. Show that one more time right there. Arrow method 1, 2, 3, arrow. Draw the sides of the buildings, add the details. And then our radial design, right, based on a circle. And then I used contrasting colors of color schemes, warm and cool colors, and I painted it. All right, so this is something super simple. I did this in like an hour and a half. So if you do it with your kids, it might take a little longer. They might want to add a little bit more details than I do. They might take a while for the outlining. If you want to just bypass the sketch step and just want to go straight to drawing with Sharpie, sometimes I do that as well. I just wanted to show you the steps. So I sketched it with pencil, outlined it with Sharpie, erased everything, right? So I didn't see those pencils anymore, and then I painted it. I used a thicker Bristol pad paper. I used a Crayola watercolor set. You can find these pretty much anywhere. You might be able to buy some art supplies online. I would get a watercolor paper, right? Watercolor paper means it's going to be a thicker paper. It could absorb more water, and then it won't, this is kind of warping a little bit, meaning it's kind of bending from the water, because this is not a watercolor paper. This is a Bristol pad paper. Thank you, Ben, for telling me. Good job. Thank you. Do I get a gold star? So yeah, check this stuff out. I put the material list on our Facebook and social and our Instagram page, so you can find a list of all the things I used today. Again, salt, glitter is optional. Just make sure you add that when the paint is wet. If anyone has anything specific they'd like us to do for a live demonstration, whether it's art or music, please send us a message on our Facebook or Instagram pages, or send us an email, or reach out to us through our website, because we'd like to be able to find some things that people are interested in and get them out there. And then if you're curious, again, of looking at our future streams, go to creativets.org/live, and you can find our schedule up for this week, and then we'll be posting things for next week as well. All right? Thanks for joining today.